Hey guys, welcome to another edition of How to Yard. Today we're in another state, and this time we're going for an Acura GSR. The GSR is the dual overhead cam Vtec engine, one of the most iconic imports in our Honda scene, and what do you know, I found one that's bone stock with the wheels and an untouched, molested engine. Ask yourself when the last time it was that you saw a GSR in this type of condition. I'm sure some of you are going to say, oh, I have one and it wasn't too long ago. Well, here we are in one of the yards out here. We found a GSR B18C, untouched, no intake, no aftermarket parts, stock wheels except for the rear one over there, and it looks like that could have been where the accident was. But sometimes you'll see damages like this which also could have been created by the forklift. But going inside, the interior looks stock. I think this might be a win. Because it's a GSR, I'm not going to waste any time second guessing it. I'm going to grab it. There's things like this that are highly valuable regardless the condition. Most of the time when we come out to the junkyards, you can't check the compression ratio. There's no battery. Could we bring our own in? Possibly, but we have to work within the limitations of the rules set by the yard. We have made this our place of business, and we want to keep coming back, and we don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize our relationship. Things on this that are going to be valuable: the transmission casing if the gears aren't good. We have a Vtec cylinder head, the Vtec cylinder head. There's a B16 version, and then there's the GSR 1.8 version, and the GSR head appears to be more sought out after than the B16. And then of course the GSR block. The GSR block is the one that most drag racers are looking for. Either way, we got a total win here. Now of course if it runs, that's even better. Other things we're going to take is this cluster. People like the GSR cluster because it shows the 8,000 RPM red line. We're going to take that as well. This is an OBD2 car. That means the ECU might not be as valuable as the others, but I'm going to grab it anyways because it is the GSR. There could be somebody that's trying to make an OBD2 version of the swap, and they need that for emissions purposes. There are other things that we could grab too, like the intermediate shaft and axles. That would be great for a swap into a Civic. I could also grab the shift linkage and shifter. We might as well do it all. These wheels right here are known as the GSR blades. This wheel, along with the 2000 Civic Si, was like the wheel of choice in the early 2000s. I got a set in 2001 off a 2001 GSR, and I paid $500 for them, and I was super proud. They had a really nice finish over them, but over the years they've gotten a little dull. This one appears to be missing one of them. I don't see the third one. I'll look inside the trunk to see if it's spared, but if I can't find a fourth one, I think I'm going to leave these behind. There are other things I could take, like the engine mounts, which would work for our EG swap, but the engine removal, in my opinion, is going to be much easier than it would be on our K-Series platform, where we have a lower subframe that needs to be dropped and then the engine needs to be pulled up out of the way. This one's going to be pulled traditionally right out of the hood, and there's not a lower subframe that we have to worry about. We still do have to disconnect the suspension, so we're going to go ahead and set up my toolbox now and lay out all our carpets so we're not laying in the dirt. Okay, we got our carpets all laid out. These are from the trunks of other cars that are out here, and that's so we don't have to lay in all the sand and get too dirty. And we have a place to put all our tools too, so they're not in the dirt as well. Alright, after you get your wheels off, you're going to take the axle nut off, which is a 32mm. I got a cordless impact here. This is by Milwaukee. Awesome half-inch tool. Next, I like to use the impact gun and an open-end wrench on the back side of this fork here. Alright, so the bolt likes to stick onto the strut fork, and it doesn't like to pull out, so what I'll do is I'll push with my thumb on the back side enough to where I can get my open-end wrench on the back, and then push as I'm extracting the bolt. Next is the 14 that goes up onto the upper strut fork. I like to first break it loose using a 3/8 ratchet. Then I'll follow up with a battery ratchet. Once that's off, we'll just slide the fork down and up out of the way. Next is our lower ball joint. We'll pull the cotter pin out using a set of dikes. You can see I'm straightening out the back side of the cotter pin. That's the side that gets folded. Then I'll use the dikes because they can they have a lot of dexterity and they can grab the end here. I just push it through and look how I'm doing that. That's going to be a 17, which is on our impact gun already. Now we'll go in there with a pickle fork. Now everyone does their suspension removal a little bit different, but we're keeping these axles, and for me doing the lower ball joint was the easiest. Alright, as we pull up out of the lower control arm, I'm going to gently tap the axle through. If this was rusted, this wouldn't be too easy. But what we're trying to do is avoid pulling the CV completely out of its joint back in there. Now that that's out, we'll just go ahead and use a pry bar and pull that axle out. The driver's side axle removed, now we're moving into the intermediate shaft. I could separate the axle from the intermediate shaft, so I'll probably do that. If I was just removing the transmission like the B series, then I would. But since we're keeping the transmission, that also means that we can keep the exhaust, the lower exhaust manifold in place. I'll want to take this because this exhaust line might meet up with our EG swap, or maybe it's just an extra piece that we wouldn't have to buy. That way someone could put this in their swap right away and then just add the exhaust section. As you can see, they cut the catalytic converters off. That's something that they recycle on their own. But check this out, we also have an oxygen sensor in place. So the only thing that we really need to do under here besides take that out is remove the shift linkage. Check this out. I don't think this car has ever had a clutch. Could that be why this is in here? Blown clutch. Look at this exhaust heat shield on here. I don't think that I've ever seen one on before. I don't know that I've ever actually worked on a GSR that hasn't been messed with. So we're going to remove that to get to the shift linkage. There's going to be a 12mm bolt just on the other side. Alright, the heat shield off. Now we can get off the shift linkage. There's our 12 that we were showing. And then the next part we have to get is what's back here. Behind this boot here, there's going to be a C-clip that covers it and protects it. With it peeled back, we can expose what I'm talking about. And this is really nice. This is really telling that this hasn't been messed with. Oh my goodness, look at that. That's what's called a roll pin. And what I'm excited about is it doesn't look like it's ever been touched. Oh my gosh, this might mean that the clutch is bad and this whole thing is good. There are tools for that. It's called a roll pin tool, go figure. It's basically like a punch, except that it has a divot in the center that would fit inside the roll pin, and it would just kind of hold it in place to make sure that the roll pin doesn't bounce outside of the ridge, which would flare it out, and then you couldn't get it out. I used to have a set, and my toolbox got stolen. This right here is a 1/4 inch extension. We are going to use the extension just like a roll pin tool, and we're just going to punch. Okay. Alright, now that it's out, our extension's stuck in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick my ratchet on the end of this and just turn it, and it will come out. Now, we're doing this all because we don't have the right tool. I would suggest having the right one. Now that the roll pin's out, we'll just remove the shift linkage. There's a 12 right here that I already loosened. There's going to be some washers that you want to pay attention to, alright? I'm going to keep this 12 and this washer. Look at the shape of that, okay? See how it fits right inside the shift linkage? Once the shift linkage is down, there's another washer. We want to keep these both. See how it's got that curvature right here that kind of sticks into the shift linkage? Keep them both. Look at this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put them both back so that we don't lose them. Okay, the next thing we're going to be working on is this rear T-bracket. Right there, those are 219s. This bracket right here, what we're going to do is we're going to take those 219s off, and that will be the last thing that we're going to remove from the bottom that I can see as of right now. Now that T-bracket we will need on our swap if it's going into an EG. That is the bracket. EGs are your 92 to 95 Honda Civics, and the rear T-bracket on the single cams won't work on the B series. You'll need this B series rear T-bracket. I believe the GSR and the LS are the same, but since we're here and we have access to it, they may not charge us any more for it. We're going to go ahead and remove it from the block first, and then once the engine's out, remember to grab it off the rear motor mount. Everything from underneath the engine is pretty much taken care of except for the shift linkage. To do that, we need to go back inside and remove the shift knob, and it spins off just like this. Once this is off, then we're going to go back underneath. I have a 12mm impact gun that I'll be able to get in there. Okay, all right, here it goes. There it is. This will be a direct replacement into a 9295 Civic. Okay, we're done underneath, moving up out top. I think it's going to be pretty quick. We're going to move for some obvious parts. We're going to undo the power steering line here. That's going to stay with the chassis. Undo this ground. We're going to undo the AC lines. Some guys might want to keep this for a potential swap, but since we're buying this as a whole, we'll be able to keep the power steering pump and AC compressor. That might be valuable to some other people. We're going to take off the air box to access the motor mounts over here. We're going to keep this throttle cable. You know, now this intake manifold is the snail kind. I guess I call it a snail because it curls down underneath. It's not the most desirable intake manifold, but you don't necessarily need to swap it out if you're putting this into something else. To save some bucks on having to replace a intake manifold or a throttle body or find a throttle body, a cable stay, we could just use the GSR throttle cable. So again, if we're putting this into a Civic, we can use this throttle cable. It comes off pretty easy. I like to pull the radiator out to give me as much room as possible. Everybody does things a little bit differently. The AC lines are off, the power steering lines are off. I got nothing that's going to hold me back on this side except for the motor mount. We're going to let that hang out. Now we're going to work ourselves over here. So this has a slave cylinder and a hydraulic line. We could disconnect it right here. That way we keep this rubber line intact because it could be a nice little piece for our swap if our EG doesn't have that already. And I like to keep brackets in place too, and there's no real reason I need to take it off. So we'll leave that on, but we have this front torque rod we can work on. Those are three 17 millimeters. We can work on the rest of the rear heater hoses and fuel lines and vacuum lines, all the emissions control stuff. Then there's the rear T. There's a 17 millimeter back here, which then will release the engine from the back of the block. And now we can move up to the wiring harness too after that. All right, so we're going to keep the wiring harness on the engine, and we're just going to disconnect it from the shock tower, which then connects it to the chassis. There's our fuel rail nut there, and our 22 is just going to fit on there just like that. Bam! You know, there is something that I did that I made a mistake for way back, and it took me a long time to figure out, so I'm going to show you this right now. As I pull this off, there's going to be a washer right behind it. There you can see it. Alright? There's technically two washers on this whole line. There's this one that I'm pulling off now, and then there's going to be the one behind the actual feed line, and that's this one. Look at these two. They're very distinct and different. You can make the mistake and put those on backwards. What happened for me was, without me knowing, I didn't realize there were two different style washers and that it mattered which way they went on. I ended up putting this one on this side. Well, what ends up happening is as you tighten this, it'll crush down inside the nut, and then it won't let fuel pass through. That's exactly what that washer's for. So make sure when you put this back on, put it on the right side. You know, this took me like a whole year to figure out in the beginning. Like, we're talking when I first started, could have been the first couple of swaps I did, and it took us so long to be able to figure that out. The engine's pretty much loose. I went over everything to make sure that everything was disconnected. This would be the time that you do that. It's just a pain when you got the engine halfway up and you can't figure out what's still connected. There's wiring harness bundles just like this on both sides. Okay, it's completely disconnected, untangled, and I'm gonna wrap it around the engine. Our booster hose is off, our power steering hose is out of the way. There's some plastic clips that are attached to it. Now we're gonna move that cherry picker that you see right over there uphill. It always seems like they're downhill. I always gotta push them uphill. I still have my tools on the ground. That's pretty much how I set up my stuff here. So I have it somewhat organized. I have the hand tools over there, I got the wrenches, and then usually sockets and associated tools next to it. But since it's on the carpet, I could just simply slide it up out of the way, keep it out of the dirt, and I'm still organized. We got our hoist in place, and I'm going to show you something that's indicative of the Civics and Integras. If you hadn't noticed, these hoods, you have a hood prop here, and it holds up pretty much traditionally. Okay, but these cars, for whatever reason, I couldn't tell you exactly why they did this, but I'm glad they did. These hoods can fold up pretty much all of the way, and there's even a place for the hood prop to go right there. So we don't need to take the hood off, and now we just need to be able to attach our hook. Okay, so normally what I'm going to do is grab some type of strap. Sometimes it ends up being a seat belt. We wrap it around the motor mount there, bring it around here, and we're going to wrap it around something over there. Now that the hoist is attached to the motor, just move the power steering reservoir and I can access that 17 down there. There's also one on this side. Now I'm just going to pull those out. The motor should tilt back this way and it should draw up that way, and we'd be able to angle it out. On the passenger side, I'm going to do it a little bit different. 2 nuts on either side, and then there's a stud. I'm going to take the 2 studs out first, and then I'll work on the bolt. Once those 3 are out, the motor should drop down, and then the hoist is going to catch it. Alright, now that the motor is dropped down, we're going to use the hoist to get the engine up out of the bay. The area that we're at is pretty compact and tight, so it'd be wise for us to go ahead and get the wheelbarrow up over on this side and then push this hoist back over the car, because not a whole lot of room for us to squeeze in between there. With the motor out, we can give it another inspection to look for any holes in the block, like a rod had come out. I didn't see anything on the oil pan. Well, I don't see anything on the back of the block, and it's not that it was going to make much of a difference anyways. I did want all this stuff anyway. Before I drop it in the wheelbarrow, this is when I'm going to pull off that rear T-bracket. I'm going to bolt it back onto the engine. As far as the throttle cable goes, we will take it off of the firewall right here, and then when it comes to where it connects, it twists. There we go. And I twisted it clockwise. It's keyed a certain way. There it is. Underneath the car, right there is where it attaches. Let's see if I can get my hand in there at the same time holding the camera. Let's see, there we go. And I'm just gonna push back on my finger and then slide it out. Next is the gauge cluster. I'm gonna drop the tilt, give me some room. There's 2 screws up here. I'm definitely gonna need 2 hands for this. Now that the bezel is out, there's a screw up top there, and then there's 2 on the side. Now we could pull the cluster out. Now, most of the time, these motors are going into a swap car, something that's not an Integra. And that means the plugs back here may not be the same. You know, you could use your discretion whether you want to take this wiring harness or not. Most people probably would, but the clips are going to be different between whatever chassis you decide to put this in. Last but not least is going to be the ECU. Now remember, like I said earlier, that this is an OBD2 ECU. It's not as valuable as the OBD1s. The OBD1 ECUs are chippable. That means they can go in just about anything, whereas the OBD2s, they're looking for a bunch of different emissions control sensors. But because we're here and it's available, we'll just go ahead and grab it. There might be some use to it for somebody. Right here inside the passenger kick panel, it's pretty easy to get to. Just kind of wiggle your fingers down in here and give it a quick tug and pull it out of the way, and there's the ECU. And there it is. We got our 98 Acura Integra GSR, full motor, transmission, full pull out. Numbers matching, is one of the things that I did too, so that you know it's not stolen. That brings up another thought. That's something that I always check whenever I pull the motors and transmissions. If it's the style of engine that has a VIN number, I do verify that it's the numbers matching. What happens when you have a non-matching VIN number in a vehicle? I don't think that the yard actually checks the VIN numbers to verify that they match with the car. What do you do if you're in possession of something like that? I don't know. I haven't come across that yet, but I did think of it. So I think that's something I could further investigate, just so that we're all protected here, right? We would hate to come across something that is stolen. Full motor, transmission, fully complete, fully stock, numbers matching. We do have our shift linkage and both axles. Guys, I think that's going to conclude this Howdy Yard GSR. Thank you very much for tuning in. Make sure to check out our sister channel at Vtec Academy. Make sure to check out our website at hushperformance.com. Thank you again, and happy tuning.